50 feet underground, beneath a city that is dying. The year is 1945. The month, April. The day, April 28th. And somewhere beneath the burning, collapsing streets of Berlin, inside a concrete bunker reinforced with 6 feet of steel and silence, one man sits at a map table, staring at divisions that no longer exist. His hands are trembling, not from age alone, but from Parkinson's disease, exhaustion, and the slow psychological disintegration of a man watching everything he built turn to smoke. His name needs no introduction. But what happened in those final 48 hours? The conversations, the decisions, the betrayals, the last meals, the final orders. That story has been buried under myth, propaganda, and 70 years of historical distance. Tonight, we go underground. Tonight, we walk the corridors of the Führerbunker. Tonight, we witness the end of the Third Reich, not from the outside, but from within. To understand what is happening underground, you must first understand what is happening above. By April 28, 1945, Berlin is not a city anymore. It is a graveyard that hasn't finished filling yet. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov's First Belarusian Front and Marshal Ivan Konyev's First Ukrainian Front have encircled the German capital completely. Over 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, hardened, vengeful, exhausted from 4 years of the most brutal warfare in human history, are pressing inward from every direction. The streets of Berlin look like this. Entire apartment blocks reduced to hollow shells of brick and dust. Tram lines twisted like broken wire. Dead horses lie in intersections. Because by this point, fuel has run out and horses were pulling ammunition carts through city streets. The smell of smoke, of burst sewage pipes, of cordite, of death, hanging over everything like a permanent fog. The Soviet artillery, and we are talking about over 40,000 artillery pieces and mortars deployed in the Berlin operation, fires continuously, not in waves, continuously. The ground shakes. Windows that still have glass shatter. Children hiding in cellars press their hands to their ears and pray. The German defenders of Berlin are tragedy in themselves. By late April 1945, the forces defending the city are not the elite Wehrmacht divisions of 1941. Those men, the Lancers who crossed into Soviet territory 4 years earlier, confident and well-equipped. Most of them are dead, buried from Leningrad to Stalingrad to Kursk to Warsaw. What remains? Volkssturm units, the People's Militia, made up of men too old or too young to have served earlier. Boys of 14, 15, 16 years old, given a Panzerfaust anti-tank rocket, 30 minutes of training, and sent into the streets against Soviet T-34-85 tanks. Men of 60, 65, given rifles and told to hold positions against battle-hardened Soviet infantry. These are not soldiers in any professional sense. They are sacrifices, and they know it. Inside the bunker, Hitler calls them cowards when they fail to hold. He does not see their faces. He does not see their age. He moves phantom divisions across his maps, divisions that have ceased to exist, and screams at generals who dare tell him the truth. The truth is this: Berlin will fall. It is not a question of if, only when. Let's go underground now. The Führerbunker. Führerbunker is not one structure. It is a complex of 2 connected bunkers beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden in central Berlin. Construction was completed in stages. The deeper section finished in 1944, reinforced specifically because Allied bombing had become impossible to ignore. You enter through a staircase. You descend. The air changes immediately, damp, recycled, carrying the permanent smell of diesel from the generators that run 24 hours a day. The generators never stop. The moment they stop, everything goes dark. The bunker has 18 rooms arranged along a central corridor. The ceilings are low, roughly 8 feet. The walls are painted a pale, institutional gray-green. Everything is concrete. Everything vibrates when the artillery hits above. The rooms are small. Hitler's personal suite, his office, his bedroom, his bathroom, takes up 2 rooms. Eva Braun, his longtime companion, has the room adjacent to his. There's a map room, a conference room, a telephone exchange room. Though by late April, most telephone lines to the outside world have been cut by Soviet advances. A small medical room where Hitler's personal physician, Dr. Theodore Morell administers daily injections, a cocktail of vitamins, amphetamines, and various compounds that historians still debate. Some believe these injections contributed significantly to Hitler's deteriorating physical and mental state. Around 500 people pass through the bunker complex during its final weeks. Staff members, military aides, SS guards, secretaries, generals summoned for briefings, a rotating cast of true believers and terrified functionaries, all trapped together, 50 feet underground, while the Soviet noose tightens above them. The atmosphere, according to every surviving witness, is indescribable. Traudl Junge, Hitler's personal secretary, one of the last surviving witnesses, described it years later as existing in a kind of suspended reality. Outside, the world is ending. Inside the bunker, meetings happen on schedule. Tea is served. Hitler discusses his plans for rebuilding the city of Linz in Austria, an art project he has been planning for years, while the city above his head burns to nothing. This is the psychological portrait of the final days. Not dramatic last stands, not noble sacrifice, but a strange, terrible unreality. A man in his inner circle refusing to acknowledge what every single piece of evidence is screaming at them. April 28, 1945. 36 hours before the end. 3 events happen on this day that shatter whatever psychological stability remains inside the bunker. The first betrayal, Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, architect of the Holocaust, the man Hitler once called the true Heinrich, the faithful Heinrich, has been conducting secret peace negotiations with the Western Allies through Swedish diplomat Count Folke Bernadotte. Hitler learns of this through a BBC radio broadcast. The BBC, a foreign radio station, tells Adolf Hitler that his most loyal subordinate, the man who commanded the most feared security apparatus in the world, has been attempting to surrender behind his back. The reaction inside the bunker is volcanic. Witnesses describe Hitler entering a state of rage that went beyond anything they'd seen before, and these people had witnessed his rages for years. He screams. He shakes. He declares Himmler a traitor. He immediately orders Himmler's SS liaison in the bunker, Hermann Fegelein, who also happens to be married to Eva Braun's sister, arrested on charges of desertion and treason. Fegelein had actually tried to slip away from the bunker a few days earlier, found in civilian clothes in his Berlin apartment with a woman who was not his wife and a suitcase full of cash and forged documents. He is brought back to the bunker. He is interrogated. And on April 28th, he is taken into the Reich Chancellery Garden above and shot. Eva Braun reportedly made no appeal for her brother-in-law's life. The second betrayal, Hermann Göring. Earlier, on April 23rd, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe and once Hitler's designated successor, sent a telegram from Bavaria suggesting that since Hitler was trapped in Berlin and unable to function as head of state, Göring himself should assume leadership. Hitler had him arrested, stripped of all offices, sentenced to death, a sentence never carried out because the regime collapsed before it could be executed. 2 of the 3 most powerful men in Nazi Germany, betraying him within days of each other. The third, the army. Throughout these final days, Hitler receives a continuous stream of military briefings that tell the same story. Army Group Steiner, a force Hitler had ordered to launch a relief attack toward Berlin from the north, has not moved, cannot move, does not have the strength to move. General Felix Steiner, commanding what remains of his depleted forces, simply does not have the manpower or armor to execute the attack Hitler has ordered. When this is finally confirmed, Hitler orders everyone except his inner circle out of the conference room, and what follows, according to multiple witnesses present, is a breakdown of historic proportion. He declares the war lost. He declares he has been betrayed by everyone. He declares he will stay in Berlin and die there. For the first time, publicly, to his staff, Adolf Hitler admits the Third Reich is finished. The room is silent. Some people are weeping. Some are stone-faced. Generals who have served him for years stand in a concrete room 50 feet underground and listen to the architect of World War II announce his own defeat. April 28th, late evening. In the middle of all this, the collapsing front lines, the betrayals, the Soviet army fighting block by block less than a mile away, Adolf Hitler marries Eva Braun. Eva Braun arrived in Berlin voluntarily on April 15th. She did not have to come. She could have remained safely in Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria. Everyone told her to stay. She came anyway. Witnesses describe her as calm, even serene, a woman who decided how her story would end and felt, in some disturbing way, at peace with that decision. A minor city official, Walter Wagner, is located and brought to the bunker. He is wearing a Volkssturm uniform. He conducts the ceremony in a small conference room. The wedding is legally required to be witnessed by two people. Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann sign as witnesses. The ceremony lasts approximately 10 minutes. Afterward, there's a small gathering. Champagne is served. People sit in the corridor and the map room. Hitler's secretaries are present, some senior staff, and they eat sandwiches and drink champagne while the Soviet 8th Guards Army fights its way through the Tiergarten district, less than 2,000 meters away. Traudl Junge later described the atmosphere as dreamlike, surreal beyond any language she could find for it. People talking about old times, small memories, where they had been before the war, as if trying to reconstruct a normal world by talking about it, when everything outside the concrete walls had gone completely insane. At some point during the evening, Hitler takes Traudl Junge aside and dictates his final political testament. He blames the Jews for the war. He expels Göring and Himmler from the party. He appoints Grand Admiral Karl Donitz as a successor. He names a new cabinet that will never meet, a new government that will never govern. He does not express regret. He does not acknowledge the 70 to 85 million human beings killed in the war his decisions caused. He maintains, to the last written word, that he was right, and that history will vindicate him. It has not. April 29, 1945, the last full day. Soviet forces are now fighting in the Mitte district, the central borough of Berlin. The Reich Chancellery itself, the building directly above the bunker, is under artillery fire. Pieces of the ornate building that Hitler had rebuilt specifically to project the power of the Reich are falling into rubble. Inside the bunker, Hitler spends much of the day in a state of quiet, almost eerie calm. The rage of the previous days has subsided. What witnesses describe now as a kind of resignation, a man who has made his decision and is waiting to execute it. He says goodbye to his staff in small groups. He walks along the line of secretaries and female staff members, takes each hand briefly, murmurs something. Witnesses say he seemed barely present, as if he had already mentally left the room. His eyes, described by nearly everyone who saw him in these final days, are described the same way, distant, flat, already somewhere else. He tests the cyanide capsules on his dog, Blondie, a German shepherd he had owned for years. He does not fully trust the capsules he has been given, worried they might be compromised by the SS. The dog dies. Hitler shows no visible reaction. Staff members who had grown attached to the dog are quietly devastated. He instructs that his body and Eva Braun's body must be burned after death. He is aware of what happened to Mussolini 3 days earlier, April 28th, when the Italian dictator's body was hung upside down from a gas station roof in Milan and mutilated by crowds. He will not allow that. He gives explicit instructions. Burn everything. Leave nothing. At approximately 2 a.m. on April 30th, Hitler calls Traudl Junge again and dictates personal letters. Then he retires. The bunker does not sleep. The sound of artillery is constant. Some of the staff drink heavily. There are witnesses' arguments, to weeping, to people sitting in silence staring at the floor. Some people are writing letters to families they don't know if they will ever see. Others are burning documents. The smell of burning paper mixes with diesel exhaust and concrete dust throughout the corridors. Above, Berlin is in its final agony. The Reichstag building, roughly 1.5 kilometers from the bunker, is under direct assault by Soviet forces. The battle for the Reichstag is one of the most savage urban combat engagements of the entire war. Soviet soldiers fighting room by room, floor by floor, through a building that has been converted into a fortress by SS troops and Volkssturm defenders. The fighting will continue for days. Soviet soldiers will eventually raise a red flag over the Reichstag, multiple flags, actually, because each unit wants the honor. The famous photograph, Yevgeny Koldyaev's image of 2 Soviet soldiers raising the hammer and sickle over the ruined dome of the Reichstag, will become one of the most iconic images of the entire war. But that image will come after. On the morning of April 30th, the battle for the Reichstag is still raging. The Soviet flag is not yet planted. The war is not yet over. But in the bunker, everything is over already. April 30th, 1945, approximately 3:30 p.m. The door to Adolf Hitler's private study is closed. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, witnesses in the corridor hear a single gunshot. They wait. The SS guards who stand outside do not immediately enter. There is a protocol. Strange as that word sounds in this context, but there is a procedure for this moment that has been quietly understood for days. After several minutes, the door is opened. Adolf Hitler is found slumped on a small sofa. He has shot himself in the right temple with his service pistol, a 7.65 millimeters Walther PPK. Eva Braun is beside him. She has not used a gun. She has taken cyanide. Her face, according to those present, appears almost peaceful. The smell of cyanide, described by witnesses as bitter almonds, is present in the room. Martin Bormann and others carry the bodies up through the emergency exit to the Reich Chancellery garden above. The garden is under intermittent Soviet artillery fire. Soviet shells are falling in the area. The people carrying the bodies have to move quickly. The bodies are laid in a shallow depression in the bomb-cratered ground. Doused with petrol from jerry cans have been brought up specifically for this purpose and set alight. The fire burns for several hours. The people who watch, Goebbels, Bormann, various aides, and SS officers, stand at the entrance to the emergency exit and give the Nazi salute as the flames take hold. Then they go back underground, and the war continues above them for another 8 days. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. V-Day, victory in Europe. But victory is a complicated word for what happened in those final weeks. By the time the guns fell silent, the Second World War had killed an estimated 70 to 85 million people. The Soviet Union alone lost between 26 and 27 million, a number so large it has never been fully absorbed by Western historical imagination. An entire generation of Soviet men, simply gone. Villages where no men came home. Families with no father, no brother, no son. Germany itself lay shattered. Millions of refugees moving west. Cities reduced to rubble fields. A generation of young German men dead in the snows of Russia, the deserts of North Africa, the hedgerows of Normandy, the concentration camps, discovered by Allied forces moving east and west, revealed to the world the full, documented horror of what the regime had done. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, hundreds of thousands of Roma, disabled people, Soviet POWs, political prisoners. The people who survived the bunker, their fates vary. Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda remained in the bunker with their 6 children. On May 1st, the day after Hitler's death, Magda Goebbels administered cyanide to each of her 6 children as they slept. Then she and Joseph Goebbels died by suicide in the garden above. Their children's names were Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun. The oldest was 12. Martin Bormann attempted to escape through the Soviet lines on the night of May 1st. For decades, his fate was unknown. In 1972, construction workers in Berlin uncovered skeletal remains later confirmed to be Bormann's through DNA testing in 1998. He had died near the Weidendammer Bridge, likely from cyanide suicide. Traudl Junge, Hitler's secretary, survived. She made it out of Berlin, was briefly captured and released by Soviet forces, and lived until 2002. She spent much of her later life in a state of complex guilt and moral reckoning, giving interviews and cooperating with documentary filmmakers. Her final major interview was completed just days before her death. She said she had tried for decades to understand how she had been present for all of it and had not seen clearly what it was. "I was young," she said, "but that is not an excuse. Other young people saw it clearly. The Soviet soldiers who fought their way into Berlin, who took casualties in their hundreds of thousands in the final weeks of the war, many of them never spoke about what they had done, not because they were ashamed of victory, but because the cost of it was too heavy to carry in ordinary language. One Soviet veteran, interviewed decades later, was asked what he felt when he heard Germany had surrendered. He thought for a long time. Then he said, "I felt nothing. I had left feeling behind in 1941, 50 feet underground, beneath a city that had finished dying. This is how the Third Reich ended. Not with a dramatic last stand, not with some mythological twilight of gods, but with a single gunshot in a small concrete room, the smell of burning petrol in a bombed-out garden, and silence. The silence, when the guns finally stopped, was the loudest thing anyone had heard in years. The men and women who built that bunker, who followed orders, who saluted in that garden. They had started a war that consumed the world and swallowed millions. They had constructed an ideology of murder and made it state policy. They had marched armies across a continent and left behind them a trail of destruction that took generations to recover from, and in some places has never fully healed. History does not forget this, and neither should we, because the lesson of the Führerbunker is not about one man's madness. It is about what happens when institutions fail, when ordinary people comply, when the machinery of a state is pointed toward catastrophe, and no one with the power to stop it does. The bunker is gone now. The site in central Berlin is a parking lot. There is a small information board nearby that explains what once stood there. Most people walk past it without stopping, but the history remains. In the archives, in the testimony of survivors, in the photographs, the documents, the bones still being identified by forensic teams in fields across Eastern Europe. The battlefield never fully goes quiet, and the voices from it, if you are willing to listen, still have something to say. This has been the last 48 hours of Adolf Hitler inside the Führerbunker.